We're now joined exclusively by ANC's spokesman on land affairs, Ronald Lamola, formerly deputy president of the ANC Youth League. He now sits on two of the party's most powerful bodies, the National Executive Committee and the National Working Committee. So, Mr. Lamola, thank you so much for joining us. Now, back in December, the ANC had agreed on some of these measures as long as it didn't hurt the economy. You could argue that the debate in itself is actually hurting confidence. So why go ahead with the plan?
Yeah, obviously, any policy debate will have unintended consequences. But if we wanted to hurt confidence or we wanted to collapse the economy, we could have immediately said we are nationalizing the land from Parliament. But we have been very clear that we do not want to nationalize the land all of the whole country. We want to use the instrument, the measure of expropriation without compensation in certain defined circumstances, which will also be properly safeguarded by the Constitution and also the enabling legislation. So it will be done properly and through the rule of law. So the debate is necessary because of the context and the history of our country of inequality. We need to have a land reform which will enable all South Africans to participate in the mainstream of the economy, either through agriculture or through any means next to urban areas where they reside or for economic reasons in various parts of the country. So it's a very important, necessary debate for inclusive economic growth.
Okay, a lot of, from what I'm reading, is that the majority of citizens actually do not want the Constitution amended, something that you will have to do. Are you absolutely certain at this moment that this is the right recourse?
It is not true that the majority of the citizens do not want it to happen. From the public hearings which were happening, you will remember South Africa is also a country which the majority of the citizens were illiterate because of the apartheid. And because of that, most of them chose to make verbal inputs into the public hearings, which happens across the countries, in the town halls, and in some of the rural halls of the country. They did make verbal inputs. What the issue that is being raised is the fact that the written submissions, most of them says they do not want it to happen. But that is also on the basis of the realities of which I have just spoken about in terms of the literacy of the country. But there is consensus in the country. Recently, the Human Rights Research Council released a research report which also reflected that reality that the majority of South Africans want land reform to happen and also want, in certain defined circumstances, expropriation without compensation to happen. But what you also need to understand is that this was not a referendum which is driven by the majority of people who spoke. It was a soliciting of opinions which is driven by substance of the input. And from the substance of the input, it's clear that we need to provide clarity that in certain defined circumstances it can be done.
Right. I mean, I'm also hearing from, for example, the Farmers Lobby Group, Agria, say that they're worried about the uncertainty that this creates. South Africa is a huge exporter of citrus. It's a huge exporter of grapes and corn. So how can you make sure that actually the farmers and the agricultural business is on your side?
No, Agri-SA, we are in discussion with them, we're in discussion with farmers, we're in discussion with everyone. If we do not want people to participate in the formulation of the policy, it will have just been left to Parliament to resolve, because we already have a 62% majority in Parliament, and we could have just said, let the discussion only remain in Parliament. But we allowed the whole country to have a discussion, which includes farmers, which include property owners, which include the opposition, which include all players in the South African society to make an input, including churches and various interest groups. So the debate as it is coming now, there is emerging consensus in South Africa that land reform needs to happen with a speed that will include all South Africans for equitable redistribution of the land. And we're also clear that all South Africans need to share in the land. Black, white, colored, Indians, everyone must have some kind of an equitable redistribution and share in terms of the land. So we are not saying that we are going to drive people out of the country, but we are saying there must be equal sharing of the country's land so that everyone is able to participate in the economy, because of the apartheid skewed racial ownership or patterns of ownership of the land. The majority of the country was excluded.
Let me ask you also about some of the residential land. So this is, some of the other concerns that we've been hearing is that if residential land comes under question in the constitutional change, then that could have a huge impact, a systemic impact on your banking sector. How do you avoid that from happening? And how simply do you choose what land goes to whom?
Yes, we are considering that, and that's why we're saying the expropriation is going to happen in certain defined circumstances. Obviously, that will include land that is being underutilized or land that is not being used, vacant land, land that is held for speculation, and various lands that will be identified for these purpose. And for that reason, we are also considerate of the realities that some of the residential land, not only residential land, but also commercial properties, it will be difficult to expropriate them without compensation. But where there is a need, there might be a need to expropriate in certain defined circumstances with a compensation and so forth. But the model that we are following, it's a model that is defined by the Constitution, which is also going to give proper safeguards to every property rights holder. So this is not going to diminish or wipe up the property rights. The only thing that can wipe up or diminish the property rights of anyone is if we implement blanket nationalization of the land countrywide, which we are saying is not what we are going to do. We are going to do it in properly and certain defined circumstances, which is going to follow the rule of law.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Lamola. Of course, he is the ANC's National Executive Committee member and spokesperson on land affairs. He's Ronald Lamola.